It is Thursday. Don't want to lose track of the days here. But I drove 8 hours yesterday total. I took my son back to his campus. They had to move everything out, and people have been doing that at different days. So it was almost 4 hours down and almost 4 hours back. So it was interesting though. There were still plenty of cars on the road on the way down. I wouldn't say it was traffic, um, but on the way back, I think I was the only non-tractor trailer truck out there. So as other people have said, one good thing about that is it tells you there's a lot of stuff being delivered and things like that to help us kind of get through this. And so I thought I would just continue to kind of touch base with you and encourage you and um, I was just watching the some of the press conference with the president, some of the people there, and despite there's a lot of negativity right now with the economy and some of those other things, there is some good things just in terms of the disease itself and its the limited number of people that it's actually impacting in a really serious way. We need to care about them, of course, but so I think it'll be a matter of getting through it and just enduring it and kind of doing the best that we can, which you're doing. So what I want to do today is kind of touch base again with the books that we're kind of looking at. Ben Sass's book, Them, and Friedman's book, The World is Flat. So let's start with Sass. We're basically going to do one chapter today so that I can kind of parallel the two. But he brings up the fact, so he's kind of looked at why our society has kind of gone where it has and why we're unable to have meaningful discussion and dialogue anymore, with our differences. He talks about basically what our nation is and the founding of our nation and maybe the way our founders looked at things, which might inform our conversation. One of the things he mentions is the word nation itself comes from a Latin word pertaining to birth. And Sass basically brings up and says that doesn't really apply to our country. If you look at our past, really the character of our nation is because so many people have come from so many different places. A lot of you as students, relatives of yours, first, second, third, fourth generation, came from another country. So that's why you're here. That's why you were born here. That's why you were born citizens in many cases if you were born in this country. And so our kind of the foundation of our country doesn't really fit with this idea of birth. Our founders also knew and had an understanding that maybe we need to get back to, Sass is arguing, that we are essentially flawed people. We're flawed individuals. We make mistakes. We have yet to meet a perfect person. And so because of that, we have this nature that is flawed. And when you get a bunch of people together, you have a bunch of people and systems and politics that are flawed. And so basically a few things that he says would help our country to kind of not be as maybe as emotional or as divisive as we sometimes can be, is to not trust our political leaders too much, and that our politicians shouldn't confuse their temporary jobs with ultimate meaning, and that we as citizens should cultivate humility, which means that we are open to the idea that we're not always right about everything, that we could be wrong. And when that happens, you keep an open mind. You're less aggressive to people who bring up maybe a different way to look at things. And he talks about politicians, too, that they've been entrusted, at least in a temporary sense, with a job to do. And that they need to remember that they are kind of caretakers of what they have, as opposed to owning it and changing changing the world as we know it, and some of those ideas. I think that's what he's getting at, anyways. And he said that with Federalist 10, which some of you read the people, or you at least you heard of the Federalist Papers at least. But the biggest problem we have is factions, which is the idea that we are self-interested people, and we tend to hang out with people that have the same interests as us. In politics, it's no different. Factions form, and they want to get their ideas passed at the expense of what other people want. And so because of that, in our society, we live in a free society, very large, diverse society. You have factions that basically butt heads all the time and compete with one another to get power. And so one of the things that SAS says is that, the founders understood this and understood that we need systems in place to protect us from each other. And that the system, so you can think of our country, like, what is the system that we have? We have checks and balances. Right now, we see that happening. We see that the executive branch is getting involved in unprecedented ways right now to help with this coronavirus and trying to unleash money and unleash help and declare emergencies and things like that have ramifications to them. They're using the power that they were given by our Constitution to kind of help people in emergency times. Congress is certainly needed, the legislative branch, because they're in charge, if you remember, of the money. The House of Representatives has the power of the purse, and our founders wanted it that way because the House is the closest branch to the people. So we're talking about $1 trillion stimulus package right now to keep businesses going, to put money in people's pockets so people don't see this big economy tank and things like that. So these are all steps that we've empowered the government to do, but at the same time, the branches also push back against one another when there's one branch tries to take too much power. And they remind them that they don't have a right to do that, maybe. And so the history of the United States has largely been the story of these branches pushing back against one another for the good of all. And, in fairness, there is a bit of divisiveness in that, right? That I'm going to stop you from doing what you want to do. None of us like that. But we also know that it's for the good of our country, and we use the Constitution as a model. So right now, it's really the legislative branch and executive branch involved in this crisis. The judicial branch would get involved if challenges were made to some of the decisions that are made by the president or the executive branch, or laws are passed by Congress. That's when some of that might get challenged, and the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, would step in and say it's not constitutional. But sometimes even that, if you think back to what we talked about with Abraham Lincoln and suspending people's habeas corpus during the Civil War, the president is empowered with emergency powers. So that'll be interesting to see how that unfolds in the days that go on here. The other thing our separation of powers, our three branches of government, as one of the solutions that we have to this divisiveness is letting the branches kind of work, continue to trust in those limitations that we have that will stop one faction or one group from gaining all power. George Washington, in his farewell address, which SAS brings up, and I know that a lot of we did Socratic circles on that, and you did a really nice job with that because you remembered it, you understood it, you rightly interpreted it. But Washington said there are two things that he worried about as president as he was retiring. The two things you have to watch out for in politics is the power of the political party and our involvement in foreign affairs. So if you look at where a lot of the divisiveness comes from, those two areas, Washington was certainly onto something. The danger of political parties. I think today, I think Washington would soon have come to the conclusion that parties are kind of unavoidable, or faction. They naturally happen. There were factions right in his administration. So as much as we would like these things to go away, I think they're going to be obviously still part of us. But I think what Washington would say is partisanship might be the bigger problem. What that means is you are looking at everything through the lens of your political party as opposed to what might be good for the nation. And SAS talks about that in the book, that he has taken heat because at times he has split with his own party and has also obviously challenged the opposing party as well. So he can kind of get it from both ends from people, so he knows all too well. Do you know that Washington's farewell address is read every year before Congress as a reminder of what Washington thought? And maybe I think probably it's a way to get us to focus maybe on really thinking hard before we get involved in foreign nations, as well as the partisanship that seems to be dividing us as a country. So I think Washington's words are very timely, and certainly Sass, I thought they were as well. The other thing that he brings up is for us as a solution, remember, and you are all products of different, you have different views of government and politics and parties. Your parents do. Some of you come from conservative homes, liberal homes, independent homes, maybe homes that couldn't care less about any of this. But we all tend to view issues a certain way based upon how we view things. In philosophy class, we talk about this as worldview. It's the lens that you kind of see things through. And a lot of times we don't look at our own lens. It's just the way it is. We see things a certain way right away. And what we often don't take the time to appreciate that someone else may see these things in a completely different lens, in a completely different way. For instance, progressives tend to see the world as a battle between victims and oppressors. So again, these are Sass's ideas. But that when progressives look at the world, they look at the world as a competition, as a battle between oppressors and those that are oppressed. Okay, victims and victimizers. So they see all the issues in that way. Whereas conservatives tend to see this as a battle between the civilized and the barbaric. They tend to look at, what is going to ensure civilization, what's going to lead us to barbarism. And so they see everything in those lines, as opposed to victims and victimizers. They look at the civilized and the barbaric. How do we protect civilization? What is the, how can we navigate through this? And then finally, he says that libertarians see everything in terms of freedom and coercion. A battle between our freedom, in some cases, our unbridled freedom, to coercion to a certain degree. In philosophy class, we actually read an article called "In Defense of Anarchism," which you probably find hard to believe that someone would actually defend anarchy with our understanding of what that word is. But it reminds you why definitions are important and what anarchists actually believe and act upon. And we've actually in this country have quite a history with anarchists who've been involved in assassinations of presidents and things like that. So it's not as crazy as you might think. But if we keep in mind the way that we look at the world, and we keep in mind the way others look at the world, that will help us, I think, to communicate effectively sometimes. And maybe going back and taking the worldview into consideration and say, let's keep the big picture in mind and what is really dividing us here. This is why we're fighting over this issue, because we have this underlying philosophical difference between us. And if we continue to go back to what our underlying assumptions are, at least we'll understand each other a little better, as opposed to just flying off the handle thinking we're being personally attacked, because people just generally look at the world different. Different industries are full of people that look at the world differently. We talked about what Sass brings up with the media. We'll take Wall Street, for instance. Individuals there will look at the world and the purpose of an economy and things like that a whole lot differently. People that live in the Midwest, people that live on the coasts will see the world much differently. The question is, how do we bring these worlds together? What can we gain from each other? Can we help each other? Is there something that conservatives need from liberals? Is there something that liberals need from conservatives? Are we willing to accept that, or are we just going back to our political tribes and saying, no, we're going to get all the power that we want for ourselves? Sass reminds us that the founders would say, slow down, hold on. We have a structure in place because we don't always have all the answers. And there have been times in history that many would point to and say, there's been times maybe when both sides were right. I'll leave that up to you to decide. And again, these are Sass's opinions. You're welcome to disagree. But it's food for thought. It's worth talking about. Anybody that would say that maybe there's some solutions we can look at to kind of get along better, especially during a time like this. I think that's good. Okay, and then switching gears to Friedman's book on the world is flat, the forces that kind of make our world an economic leveling playing field that is level, that we are more global than ever before. We're no longer, the haves and the have-nots based upon geography. That still is there, obviously, to some degree, to a good amount of degree, actually, with resources and things like that. But opportunity digitally and through technology has changed, where people that normally would not be able to compete in this economic game are now able to, because of some of the factors that he's mentioned. So we looked at a lot of things so far, like Y2K and the whole computer technology, which changed things. The idea that we can get digital content out there no matter where we live, as long as we have access. The World Wide Web, the internet, the Y2K crisis, what that caused. Think about right now. There's going to be things happening right now because of this crisis that's going to change our world. And if you can see those things coming, you can really map out quite an existence for yourself in the future. Because maybe you'll see things that are coming that other people won't. Will there be things that we realize through this crisis that we can no longer rely upon? Will it move us quicker in a new direction in terms of the way we communicate and conduct business? If that's true, and you can kind of figure that out, or maybe figure out where that might be heading, that could really be a game changer for you and for us in terms of the way we live our lives in the future. So yesterday, we talked about this idea of outsourcing, that companies could take part of what they do, take like accounts payable for something, a business. Think of a grocery store in Torrington, like Stop and Shop or Big Y or something. They make money. They have money coming in. Who does their books? Who balances the budget? Who figures out how much they're making and what they need to do? Well, some companies will outsource part of that to a group of other people in another country that can just focus on that. And so that's kind of what outsourcing is. And companies started to do that. The other thing that Friedman brings up, though, is they went further. So the sixth force that flattens the world today is something called offshoring. So think of it this way, where outsourcing might take one part of what you do and have it done in another place, another location. Like we use India, China as examples. Imagine now, though, that you take your whole business offshore and you open it up in a factory, for instance, in an entire other country. So you take your whole business and move there. China joining the World Trade Organization in 2001 was a game changer as far as that goes, because now foreign companies figured out that they would be protected by international law and sound business practices if they did choose to move their business to China. Why would you want to do that? Well, think of this. If you created something right now during these days while you were home in kind of just hanging out the way we are, China has a massive number of people that would be potential customers for you. So you would want to get your product there. Well, more than that even, think of this. You open your business there. Not only do you have all those customers there, but now you have all those employees that you can choose from. And those employees would be much less demanding in terms of healthcare and wages. So you could actually open your company or move your company there. So what started to happen was countries started to compete for incentives to get businesses to move to their country. China had incentives. Maybe it was education, tax breaks. Maybe another country would get, hey, move here. This is how much more money you can make. This is what we can do. And so what ended up happening in a place like China, they have something like 160 cities. Think about this, with a population of 1 million people or more. And so all of these cities were potential landing grounds for businesses. So there are some cities in China, for instance, that might make almost all of the glass frames for glasses in the world come from that one city. Or he used the example of cigarette lighters. That's basically what their industry is based upon, is making all of these things. And do you know that even what happened as businesses started to move to China, China replaced the United States as the #1 importer of Japanese products. China is the #1 importer of Japanese products into their country. So we saw massive changes. Also, imports from China, it's been estimated, have saved U.S. customers over $600 billion. So products are cheaper, they're made cheaper, and these are cost-cutting measures. But $600 billion has been saved by American consumers. That's you and me, people who buy products and things like that. He gives the example of being in China and talking to somebody who brought him a pair of socks. So I'm wearing Adidas socks right now, and there's Nikes, there's all sorts of brands. But the individual told him that for one pair of socks in China, it cost them 11 cents wholesale to make that pair of socks. So think about 11 cents. You're going to add to that a little, through some shipping of those socks, to other places so you can actually sell them. Think about how much money can be made just on socks based upon that it only costs 11 cents to make them. And he said that he was getting competition in China to reduce that even more. So just think of the profits that can be made there. The other thing, U.S. companies are offshoring. 90% of output from U.S.-owned offshore factories is sold to foreign consumers, but it also stimulates American exports. So even though these businesses are going to China, we sell more and more stuff there. So General Motors opened up a factory in Shanghai. It ended up creating jobs in the United States by exporting a lot of goods and services to its own factory. So the GM factory opens up in China, but yet here jobs are created because people produce things that go to that factory in Shanghai. And so we're making money. They're making more money. The Chinese people are being hired, and they're now able to purchase those products that GM makes. And perhaps maybe some of those other things that we're sending there too. Now, just so you know, I'm just passing along Friedman's ideas. This doesn't mean that I think this is all great stuff. It's explaining why the world became flat. Okay, why people can share these things, and economically, there's a lot of opportunities today. So today, America still produces 75% of what we consume. Okay. So we still produce 75% of what we consume, but that is down from 90% just a short time ago. So that source or that offshoring is a big deal in terms of how we became how we are today in terms of flattening the world. The other thing that he doesn't really mention in here, it's not the purpose of his book, but many people have talked about as we offshore, outsource, you see parts of this in American history, there is maybe a greater tendency to have peace with one another because we for good or for bad, we end up being relying upon each other for these products and the economy. Now, there's just as many negatives to this because now your economy is tied into what's going on globally. That's almost always been the case, at least since we've been trading on a massive scale with other nations. But it's even more so now because of how complicated and intertwined things have become. The other thing that he brings up is the seventh flattener now, seventh force that made our world flat, is something called supply chaining. Now, I want you to think back. I gave everyone an activity maybe around the holiday time that dealt with Rockefeller and Carnegie and horizontal and vertical integration. So if you remember, Rockefeller was more about buying up other companies, creating a monopoly that way, where Carnegie was more interested in controlling the way that steel was produced. So rather than buying out companies, you buy out the process. You buy out all those middlemen that you need to produce your product so that you control that process, which saves you a ton of money. And if you control it enough, other businesses that would be competitors to you have to use your means of production. And so you can create a monopoly that way as well. So he talks about supply chaining, and he uses Walmart as an example. So Walmart is, I think it was in Arkansas. It's kind of a small town where its plant is. But he talks about the unbelievable mechanization of Walmart, and he says this too: Walmart doesn't produce anything on its own. It is a market supply chain that is really effective at what it does. So he goes in the warehouse and he sees these robotic arms kind of moving everything down conveyor belts. He calls them rivers or streams, and they go into these bigger rivers. And then eventually these things, get bought and moved around. And so to the point where when something gets scanned in a Walmart, so someone buys something and you go through the scanner and the barcode is scanned, um, the system that they have notifies that a certain item has been bought, and notification is given that there's now a space on the shelf, and that space will be filled. And so it's recognized in the supply chain, so they always know what's needed and what's being purchased. Um, and it even gets as far where they will ship pallets of stuff where the information is coded on there in terms of what its date is. So the Walmart as a production knows through computers and things like that when things are about to expire, and so the needs are constantly shifted at Walmart in terms of what people are buying in the stores. Um, the other thing is the way it communicates, where Walmart's able to communicate better than any other company, is they get a sense of what's needed of demand. So demand for a product may soar in Texas, and the demand may not be as much in New Zealand. Well, Walmart has a system where it figures that out and can shift on the fly. Let's say that in Texas a massive heat wave hits, and they know they're going to need certain products, fans, air conditioning, belts, even whatever is needed. They have a process in place where their needs will be shifted very quickly to Texas so that people will get what they need, and maybe away from a place like New Zealand, um, and at lightning speed. Okay, and they do this better than any of their own competitors do. And part of it is what they did was they set up their own distribution centers. Okay, so let's say like a hat like this. I make hats at home. This is my business. Well, I manufacture them essentially. Okay, my next problem is how do I distribute it to customers? Well, Walmart does that. And so what used to happen is I would distribute, if I was a business, I would distribute this hat to somewhere else. A store like Walmart would go to that distribution center, pick up their products that they want to sell in their store, ship their products, or have their products shipped to their store and sell them. Well, if you think of that process, at each step of the way, somebody else is making a bit of the money on that. So the first place I send this, that distribution center would make money. Whoever shipped this hat to that distribution center would make money. What Walmart did was they bought out all of that. They said, you know what? We're going to have our own distribution center. We're going to use our own trucks to ship to our own stores. And when it did all of this, it actually made a 2% growth in money and finances and what they were making as opposed to paying somebody else to do it. It was more expensive in the front, but when all was said and done, they were actually saving 2% on everything, on a lot of their purchases, according to Friedman. And one of the things that did was the robotic arm that would take the product from the warehouse and start moving it down the conveyor belt would be dumped into the distribution center. A truck would pick up from the distribution center, bring it to the store. Once it unloaded the material at the Walmart store, trucks were not allowed. Walmart does not allow its trucks to come back empty. So that truck, to make the most of their time, would go to a manufacturer. Think of me making the hats, pick those up, and bring them to the next distribution center. So these trucks are always full. They're always working. They're always doing these things. And what it did was made Walmart a virtual leader in its industry because of the supply chain that it's able to do. Okay. Actually, Walmart consults its own meteorologists, weather-wise, and know, like, if a hurricane is about to hit, they know that they're going to need to ship a whole lot of products quickly to a certain area. Non-electronic stuff, perishable foods that you might not buy in bulk when the weather is good, but now because it's happening, you want to get them there. So they have this unbelievable communication system that can move products and create this whole massive business. Do you know that Walmart is China? So if Walmart, the business, if Walmart was a nation, it would be the 8th biggest trading partner of China. So Walmart as a business is a larger trading partner than most nations of the world in China. That's what a big deal it is. It ranks ahead of Russia, Australia, and Canada as being a bigger trading partner than those countries. And Friedman also brings up this whole idea that it's probably something like, I don't think about that, but it really does create the supply chain and the way the massive levels of communication that have to take place. The prices are set by how cheaply they can get these products and ship these products. And think about the number of people that are involved in this. He brings up Dell Computers, and how does a computer company like Dell figure out how many computers to make? Do you ever ask yourself that? Well, Dell does not, according to Friedman, Dell does not have a bunch of computers sitting around that have not been purchased or bought. They basically have all these parts that they have, and then you and I will order a specific computer that we want built a certain way. I do still think they have a small number of computers that stores sell, but they know they can kind of move these computers that are prepackaged completely. But a lot of times, Dell won't get stuck with these parts if they manufacture too many of them, or there's not enough people buying Dell anymore, because they'll use those parts in another type of Dell computer that somebody will order. So they're not going to go unused. So this idea of this big warehouse full of computers that are always sitting around that people can't, companies can't afford to sell, Friedman kind of dismisses that. It says, actually, everything is so specialized today that the parts will be used and created in the way that we want to build our computers. So the seventh flattener is this idea of supply chains. So offshoring and supply chaining, changing our world. And going back to some of Sassa's point in the first part of this, the number of people involved, languages, cultures that need to work together for everybody to benefit. Think about how important it is that we communicate effectively with one another. Our current medical crisis right now. How many countries do we hear involved in this? Certainly China's brought up a lot. Italy, Spain, the United States. Being able to move goods and ideas as quickly as possible across geographical boundaries is more important than ever. So again, I think these two books are kind of nicely tying in with one another in terms of thinking about our world and maybe hopefully stimulating some thoughts for you about your future, what you would like to get involved in, and the number of jobs that are out there that can be created and ideas that will change our world. So tomorrow I will give you another segment of this. We'll probably break for the weekend. I'm going to try to get some videos uploaded for my philosophy class and my other U.S. course. We are working on getting more digital material to you for your classes. UConn Course 2 is involved in this, is working with high schools, but we'll figure it out. We'll work it out. Continue to make the most of this time. Be positive. Don't, there's a lot of negativity out there, and certainly our lives have changed quite a bit in the last week. But be optimistic. Nations have been through this before. We've come out the other side, and this is nowhere near as deadly as things that we've experienced in the past. So stay positive, have a good time. Call people maybe that you haven't in a long time, or I know with you guys it's texting and that type of communication. But sometimes FaceTiming, checking in with somebody that maybe you haven't had time to do is a good time period for you to do those things. If it's nice outside, get outside a little bit and breathe some air. And I will be giving you, I've been saying it all week, but I will be giving you some movie recommendations of some movies that maybe you haven't seen. Hopefully they'll be free. Those are always better, right? So anyways, but the other plan I have, so this is my little hook for you tomorrow. I'm going to try to introduce you to my cat, Stella, first thing tomorrow morning when I film this. And I will show you she has something unique going on with her paws. Anyways, hope all is well with you. I enjoy doing this because it connects me to you, at least in my mind, if not in reality. So have a good day, and we'll talk to you soon.